Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first seminar for the National Energy Codes Conference seminar series. So welcome back if you've attended in years past, and we're really excited to kick things off this year. And so this first seminar is going to be talking about stretch energy codes and how states and local jurisdictions are using them to, address the impacts of climate change and also help combat future effects. So before I kick things over to Cornelia with NEEP to introduce the panelists today, just wanted to highlight some of the upcoming seminars in this series. So we'll be talking energy codes and utility programs on September 8th, energy code implementation, building to zero energy, water and carbon, talking about offsite construction and the intersection of offsite construction and building codes, and the benefits and kind of challenges and opportunities around that intersection. And then lastly, we'll be talking about multifamily buildings and kind of opportunities there to continue to advance building efficiency. And so you can learn more about the seminar series and sign up for the other seminars at energycodes.gov. /2022 summer seminar series. So with that, I will turn things over to Cornelia with the Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnerships. And Cornelia, please take it away.
Thank you, Ian. NEEP is really so happy to take part in this seminar series. We're really happy to have three experts with us today. We have with us today Alison Lindbergh, Senior Building Policy Manager at MIA, Midwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, Nick Goldsmith, Sustainability Planner for the town of Ithaca, New York, and Casey Studhalter, Green Building Program Analyst at the Washington, D.C. Department of Energy and Environment. I'm going to give a quick overview of stretch codes, and then we'll hear from each of our panelists, followed by a question and answer period. So NEEP is one of 6 RIOs, Regional Energy Efficiency Organizations, funded in part by the U.S. Department of Energy to support state and local efficiency policies and programs. And as I mentioned, we do have Alison from MIA here with us today. And our mission is to accelerate regional collaboration to promote advanced energy efficiency and related solutions in homes, buildings, industry, and communities. So starting from the broad picture, in terms of policies for energy and emissions reduction, local, state, and regional emissions reductions, the local jurisdictions make commitments to which the stretch codes will ultimately need to lead to make those commitments come to fruition. In the case of new buildings and major renovation, building energy codes, which include base codes, the code to which all jurisdictions must meet energy requirements, the stretch codes, which are optional by jurisdiction, renewable codes and zero codes, and many more. There are carbon neutral zoning ordinances. That is one way that cities such as Boston are able to integrate embodied carbon methods into city ordinances. There are zero emissions and electric ordinances and appliance standards. Appliance standards gets a little less attention, but in fact, energy efficiency in appliances will help a great deal towards fighting climate change. And in terms of existing buildings, as we all know, many of the buildings that are being built today will still be around in 2050, and they need to be built in a way that will help us fight climate change. So right now, many jurisdictions are benchmarking their buildings to see where they stand relative to a reference building. We have building performance standards, which is the next step up after benchmarking, where buildings must meet these reference standards, or there will often be fines. There are many ways of applying for financial aid in terms of meeting these standards. And again, clean heating standards and appliance standards. So starting with building energy codes in the US, there isn't a standardized approach There aren't federally issued standards, but we do have primarily two trade organizations which develop model codes. The first is the International Code Council, and the second is ASHRAE. The state or the local government determines which code to adopt, and there can be weakening amendments or strengthening amendments to these model codes, but this creates a patchwork of efficiency. And depending on the state or jurisdiction, enforcement may be dependent on the population of a given area and the number of code officials available to enforce the codes. And many municipalities do seek to go beyond these base codes. That's what we will be talking about today. Stretch codes in particular are a way that a state or a jurisdiction can make, in the case of a state, the stretch codes can allow a jurisdiction to adopt that stretch code. And in the case of a jurisdiction, that becomes mandatory within that within that jurisdiction to make the more stringent code effective. So in the NEAT region, which extends from Maine down to DC, 13 jurisdictions, we have 4 states that are currently on the 2015 IECC. The Maine has moved to 2021 in its stretch code. They're currently on 2015, and they're looking at potentially moving to the 2021 base soon. Connecticut is also on the 2015, moving soon to the 2021. DC, again, 2015, moving to the 2021 and looking at stretch codes. And West Virginia, which until very recently was on 2009, has now moved to the 2015. And similarly, you'll see on the right-hand side, states that are currently on 2018, but as you can see, all moving up to 2021, plus New York, which is skipping 2021, moving to 2024. And these asterisk states are states that are updating or creating stretch codes. So you can see here, NEAT has a tracker, and you'll see this is the 2018 IECC region, and then the blue, such as Maine, all the way down to West Virginia, we have the 2015. But as I mentioned, Maine actually has a 2021 stretch that's in effect in Portland and South Portland, and is available to any jurisdiction in Maine to adopt. And here you'll see that we do have a map showing where there are stretch codes, where there's one that is being updated, and then over here we have no, but currently under development. And as previously mentioned, there are many ways to define a stretch code. One is to go, if, for instance, in Maine, if you're on the 2015, to make the 2021 IECC, go up another model year to your stretch code. There is the Zero Energy Ready Home program from the US Department of Energy. One interesting method is the British Columbia Energy Step Code, where over time, each step becomes more stringent, reaching a final goal. And NEAT also has created a Massachusetts Energy Zero Code for both commercial and residential applications. You'll also see many stretch codes using passive house as either a requirement or an alternative compliance path. And Massachusetts is a very interesting case. Right now, they are looking at adopting a new stretch code and a new specialized municipal opt-in stretch code. The second is basically a yet more stringent code than this first stretch code. There are 296 municipalities in Massachusetts that have become green communities. Those have previously already adopted the current stretch code and will automatically be elevated to the new stretch code, which will take effect shortly, which will be released in December 2022, and then they will have the option to adopt the specialized stretch code. So I hope that helps situate what our panelists will be sharing with you today. Our first panelist is Alison Lindbergh. She is the Senior Building Policy Manager at Midwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, and she works to improve energy efficiency in buildings in the Midwest via energy codes and market transformation strategies, such as energy benchmarking. Prior to joining MIA, Alison was the director of the Buildings Policy Program at the Minnesota nonprofit organization Fresh Energy, and also served on the board of directors for the U.S. Green Building Council of Minnesota and the Technical Advisory Committee of the Green Star Residential Remodeling Standard. Alison is on the state-appointed Illinois Energy Code Advisory Council, and she is a voting member of the 2024 IECC Residential Consensus Committee. Hello, Alison. Thank you for joining us today.
Great. Thanks, Cornelia. Thank you so much for having me here. You can go to the next slide. Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Alison Lindbergh, like Cornelia said, and I work for the Midwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, and we are one of the RIOs, and we represent 13 states in the Midwestern region, and also Alaska, if you can believe it. We are a member-based organization, and our members are from all over in the energy efficiency sector. And our mission is basically to promote energy efficiency through policies and programs. One thing I just want to mention, I am going to put this into the chat. I didn't include any actual maps of stretch codes or anything like that related to the Midwest because we really don't have that many. A lot of our states are min-max states, and so they don't have that option. Not to say that there isn't interest in that. We also have a number of home rule states where municipalities can adopt stronger codes than the model codes, but most of them don't. So this is changing. If you're going to be at the summer study, you'll see that MIA has a paper that is on decarbonization in different municipalities. We selected one municipality from every state and you can see that they're all trying to work on different policies like the ones that Cornelia just mentioned, and things like energy codes and stretch codes. You can go to the next slide. So I'm here to talk about Illinois today. So while I said that we don't have any stretch codes, Illinois just became the exception to that rule. But first, let's talk about what Illinois has on its base code. So as of today, they're still at the residential 2018 IECC. And the state of Illinois is unique in the Midwest in that it actually updates its energy code every 3 years with the model codes. And although it does that, it does weaken the amendments on the residential side quite a bit. They're about 15% less efficient than the 2021 right now. And on the commercial side, though, they're not as, they don't weaken as much. And I just want to say that they actually do not have the requirements for roof replacements removed right now. That's a mistake on the slide. That's actually just for Chicago. But going forward, Illinois is updating to the 2021 IECC, and they are going to be weakening the envelope still, but they will be moving to 3 ACH 50. So it's not going to be as strong as the 2021. And then on commercial, they're going to be removing the roof replacement requirements. So bringing that insulation levels up to the current code when you replace a roof will now no longer be mandatory. It has been approved by the Capital Development Board, and it is currently in a public comment period. We don't know how long it's going to take to be signed into law, but it could be as soon as September. Next slide. So what has happened and what has changed is that in September of 2021, the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, or CEJA, was signed into law. And this bill basically was the culmination of many different clean energy and energy efficiency advocates and organizations, and also the governor's office. And there's a lot of things in this bill, but what we're going to focus on today is the fact that it created a statewide stretch code. You can go on to the next slide. It also created a change to the state energy code process. And as you probably just saw on that previous slide, that the current residential energy code is kind of a bit behind. And in order to change that, this is going to expand the advisory committee by adding more members to the committee that are energy efficiency experts. And I will just say that I have been appointed to this committee, and so I'm new in this role, but this didn't happen until after the state energy code base code process has gone through. And that this process is about to start. This new group will be working on the stretch code. So these are additions to the current Energy Code Advisory Council. Next slide. So what the bill of CEJA did for the stretch code is it basically directs the Illinois Capital Development Board, which is the governing body that works on the codes, to create residential and commercial stretch codes that will be optional to adopt by municipalities. And once a municipality adopts the stretch code, it becomes the base code for that municipality. The stretch code isn't developed yet. The bill just sets specific site energy index targets that can only be met through conservation measures. This doesn't mean that you can't put solar or you can't do offsite energy. It just means that you can't use those things to trade off the efficiency. And the targets are set to increase in efficiency every 2 to 3 years. The first target's about 9% more efficient than the commercial code right now, and 34% more efficient than the residential. And that's again because the residential code keeps getting weakened. You can move on to the next slide. So I just wanted to bring up quickly what the differences are. So before CEJA happened on the residential side, all municipalities were required to follow the state energy code, and they did not have the ability to adopt anything stronger unless you are a municipality over 1 million or you're a home rule municipality that had adopted an energy code that was as strong as the 2006 IECC by 2009. Otherwise, which is the most of the rest of the state, you only had the option of the state code. And then for the commercial code, you could do the state code or something stronger than the state code, but no municipalities had really taken advantage of that at all. Now, after the stretch code goes in place, the residential provisions, municipalities will now have an option for a stronger code for residential, or on the commercial side, they can do the base code, the stretch code, or they can do stronger than the state code. So that piece did not change. You can go on to the next slide. The reason I bring that up is because those are just for efficiency. On other codes in the state of Illinois can be amended by different municipality, but the state energy code is statewide. There are limitations on efficiency. So here are the targets for residential, and you'll see that they increase in stringency over the 2006 IECC over time. So it's really a step code, not a stretch code. And essentially the final targets are meant to get close to net zero or net zero ready. So adding renewables to this would then get buildings to net zero. Go to the next slide. And then these are the commercial targets. So again, trying to get us to net zero. Next slide. So I mentioned the piece about energy efficiency. And since that is the place where municipalities don't have as much wiggle room, like they don't have the ability to go stronger than base code or stretch code in certain instances. But for things like distributed energy resources, they're not as restricted to do that. So right now, just to highlight that point, for the state code, there's no conservation targets on how efficient that must be. It just has to be updated every 3 years, and it's often weakened, and that will apply across the state. The CEJA stretch code could have some other elements besides efficiency. It could include some distributed energy resources. And in fact, during the Illinois Energy Code adoption process for the base code, there were a lot of proposals that were included, but were laid off for possible inclusion into the stretch code. But what is only required is those conservation targets. So there may not be any DERs in the stretch code. And then there's always the option for municipalities to include other elements like solar, EVs, electrification ready, that kind of stuff through other codes or zoning, such as like an electric code. Next slide. And so one of the ways that we're trying to ramp this up, and something that also changed in CEJA, is that utility programs can now claim savings for things like energy codes. And there currently is no existing program, but there is an initiative underway to help advance the stretch code using utility programs. You can go on to the next slide. And there's a lot of benefits that happen with utility support programs. I'm not going to go much into detail on this. You can go into the next slide. But the program that's happening, or I should say initiative that's happening right now, focuses on both advancement and support. It's an initiative that's being led by Slipstream and NEA with support of the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, and it's being funded through ComEd, NICOR, People's Gas, and North Shore Gas. And it basically focuses both on the advancement of stretch codes and the compliance of stretch codes. Currently, right now, we're developing the savings framework through market transformation. And there's also an existing building element with BPS. Next slide. And I think that it's really important to understand the impact that a utility program can have for stretch codes, because there is a lot of lack of resources for municipalities to understand how to adopt and then also comply. And so these are a few of the potential program elements that could come out of it. And you'll see that they target, code officials, the building community, and then also even just the jurisdictions or policymakers. Next slide. And then the one thing I also wanted to make sure I mentioned is that, so I mentioned that Chicago is a city with a municipality of over 1 million in population, is one of those cities that can have their own code. It can, as long as it's stronger than the base code. And so they're actually going through an adoption process as well, where they're proposing the 2021 IECC. The residential would be unamended, so it would be stronger than the state code. The commercial will still have those re-roofing amendments. They've actually had those in place for a little bit, but they're also adding electrification ready requirements for heating in residences. And that's basically making sure that there's a panel that can fit electrification of heating, and then also enough space around the heating mechanical system. And then solar ready requirements on commercial buildings. And then the city already has EV ready provisions that they put into their electrical code. Next slide. So some of the next steps is that the Illinois Energy Code Advisory Council is going to start the development of the stretch code in Illinois. And that will actually be, the elements that help to meet those conservation targets that were set. It sounds like they will be working with a third party on that. And that has to be completed by July 31st, with the final language available for adoption by municipalities December 31st. I will say that there are a number of municipalities in Illinois that want to move faster than this date. And with the utilities, we are actually working with some of these municipalities to figure out what we can do to help move their codes forward faster. And even though there's always been this ability for commercial buildings to have a stronger code, the availability of this language will definitely make it easier for municipalities to adopt. Slipstream and NEA are continuing outreach on this. And you can go to the next slide, which I think is the last. And that's it for me. So thank you so much, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Alison. So I think we'll hold questions until all the presenters have gone, and thank you so much for joining us. Next, we have Nick Goldsmith. He is the sustainability planner for the town of Ithaca, New York, and implements the Green New Deal, which aims for an equitable transition to carbon neutrality community-wide by 2030. Nick led the development of the Ithaca Energy Code Supplement, requirements for net zero new construction that emphasize electrification and affordability. Also, before joining the sustainability field, Nick worked worldwide for more than a decade as a juggler and an acrobat. So welcome, Nick.
Thank you, Cornelia. I'm happy to be here. Thanks to all the organizers from NEEP and Department of Energy. This is a great panel, and I'm happy to be a part of it. And I think my presentation was queued up really nicely by Cornelia and Alison. I'll be speaking from a slightly different perspective, that of just one specific municipality, not at the state or regional level. So first, just please advance the slide. First, just a little tiny bit of background about Ithaca. We're a small college town in upstate New York. You can see our location in the map on the lower right there. Very small, about 20,000 people, and about half of that is students. So higher education is our main industry. Most of you probably have either heard the term Ithaca's coaches or know someone who went to Cornell University. Our economy is pretty stable. Politically, we're very liberal in the Ithaca area, and our building stock, since that's what we're talking a lot about, our building stock is relatively smaller buildings. We do have larger institutions, educational facilities, hospital, but apart from those, pretty small building stock. Next slide, please. And just a tiny bit more background. Cornelia mentioned the Ithaca Green New Deal, which has the bold goal of carbon neutrality townwide by 2030. And we've also got goals for our own town operations for the fleet and clean energy. Next slide, please. Mostly though, I'm going to talk about the Ithaca Energy Code Supplement. So this is local code requirements for new buildings and major renovations. And so we have municipal home rule here in New York State, and Cornelia covered that we already have a pretty strong state code. So the Energy Code Supplement lays on top of all New York State Energy Code and the Uniform Code. All of those other codes still have to be complied with to the full extent. Our code supplement lays on top. There's a real focus on greenhouse gas emissions reduction, affordability through construction costs, electrification, mostly of space and water heating, and renewable energy. And I'll dive a little bit more into that. The code was, please go back again. The code was adopted in 2021 in both the city and the town of Ithaca. My position used to actually be split, so we did a parallel effort, and it went into effect last year. And just a quick note, this Energy Code Supplement shouldn't be confused with the City of Ithaca's electrification program, which is an optional program for existing buildings, which has gotten a lot of press in the last few months. That's a great initiative, but totally different than this Energy Code Supplement, which only focuses on new buildings. Okay, next slide, please. The Energy Code Supplement gets more stringent over time. So currently, the regulations aim for about a 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and that's compared to the state code and local building practices. Now, already starting next year, the requirements are going to get significantly more stringent, looking for about an 80% greenhouse gas reduction. And then starting in 2026, we'll be requiring net zero emissions buildings with no fossil fuel usage on site. There are some exceptions for the no fossil fuel rule. Next slide, please. There's two methods of compliance for the Energy Code Supplement: a performance-based path and a prescriptive path. The performance-based path we like to call the whole building path. It allows more flexibility in building design, but also comes with somewhat of a cost. May not be as an affordable construction cost. But many organizations, developers are already using the third-party green building standards, which are incorporated into the whole building path. And so we wanted to make it easy for them. If they say already use LEED as a general practice, we wanted them to be able to use that framework and use those application materials already developed to help comply with the Energy Code Supplement. You don't need certification to satisfy our regulations, but I do want to highlight that it's not just a simple LEED silver and you're done. We use the programs like LEED as a framework, but in LEED you would need 17 energy points at least. So that's significantly more challenging than just getting LEED silver or even gold. Yeah, I can work with them. All right, I'll move on. Okay. So the easy path, it's a prescriptive path. It's a customized point-based system. For the current regulations, you need 6 points to comply. And the calculation is each point is worth about 6 to 10% in terms of greenhouse gas emission reduction. And again, that's compared to state code and local construction. It's meant to be easy to understand, easy to use. And so the analysis behind the 6 to 10% it's fairly basic. It's spreadsheet analysis, and it's going to depend on sort of the interactivity between the points. But anyway, easy to understand and use, and 4 basic point categories of electrification, affordability, renewable energy, and those sort of catch-all other points. Next slide, please. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. I know it's very, very busy, but I just wanted to show sort of the gamut of points that we offer under those 4 main: electrification, which focuses mostly on heat, space and water heating, but also cooking and clothes drying. Second section down, affordability improvements are meant to not just reduce energy costs over the operation of the building, but also construction costs through pretty basic scientific principles. So for example, AI3, efficient building shape, looks at the surface area of the building as compared to the useful square footage. And the more we can reduce that surface area, the less heat we lose in the winter. Things like window to wall ratio, AI5, where we're given a point for building with fewer windows overall, but still encouraging high percentages of windows where spaces are used often. Renewable energy, promoting on-site or off-site renewable energy, and also biomass heating. And then the last category, other points, you'll see some stuff in there that's not usually included in energy or building codes. Things, development density and walkability are getting more at offsetting transportation emissions. Same with electric vehicle parking spaces. Also want to highlight OP5, the New York Stretch Energy Code. So our code it's not a stretch code. It's required by any builder, any project in the town. But we did want to promote the New York Stretch Code. So you can get points towards our local regulations. Next slide, please. All right, I'm going to fly through this slide and only focus on a few of the boxes, but this is sort of overview of development. So hopefully you can see the light blue lines, which kind of connect these in order here. So I'm looking at the top right box. That's when the project really kicked off, spring 2017. We took a couple of years to acquire grant funding, took a couple of tries. We finally kicked it off in 2017 with a great consultant team that included architects, engineers, and planners, in addition to municipal staff. Skipping to the box in the center there, the Green Building Policy Report, spring 2018. That was a really fundamental milestone in the project in that it included several really important elements like, well, first the initial policy recommendations, which eventually transformed into the Energy Code supplement. Also a lot of research into the cost and the use of the technologies like heat pumps, like solar, like LED lighting, looking more into the feasibility technologically and financially. Also had in there, in that report, a building stock review. So it looked at our existing building stock and projected for the future so that we could see the potential impact of this policy. Public outreach, you can see there on the right-hand side, is really critical to this project. We did outreach basically the entire 4 years, but had two main points where we asked for feedback on two different drafts of the Energy Code supplement. And we got hundreds of comments each time and responded to them one by one, maybe 90% of them. So we think that helped a lot to build support for the project. In the end, we had very strong support from the community and from our council members. And we think that was due to building support the entire time we're working on the project. First draft came out in 2019, and that was sort of a plain English version, but in the code format, so that we had all the content in terms of what we were thinking of requiring, but just in more easy to understand language that was easier to understand by the public, edit and revise by us. I want to highlight the bottom middle box that sort of, as we got towards the end of this project, the Green New Deal was discussed and finally adopted in both the city and the town. And those are really ambitious goals, carbon neutrality by 2030. And that gave a lot of support to the Energy Code supplement because new building standards in terms of policy levers, that's one of the easier side, the new buildings, right? So the Green New Deal said, well, had people asking, what can we do now? What can we do now? We've got this Energy Code supplement. Let's do this. If we can't do this, we have no chance of meeting our Green New Deal goals. So it really helped the Energy Code supplement process. Next slide. And then at the end, we had a little celebration to celebrate the adoption because it's true, zero is huge. This code by 2026 will be requiring zero carbon buildings. And we wanted to celebrate that. It's a picture of a couple members of the consultant team. Next slide, please. I'll talk a little bit about the challenges before wrapping up here. I'm going to do this slide on process, but I think probably skip over most of the technical challenges, but I'm happy to address those in Q&A. So it was time intensive. It took us about 5 years from conception to adoption and took a lot of time and resources. One, made harder because it's a customized point system. So that takes extra time to develop. Two, this is, kind of a unique problem, but because we're trying to do it at 2 municipalities at once, that had its challenges too, keeping the code the same or virtually the same in both and on the same timeline was challenging. Community buy-in. So we got the voices of both, large institutions like our hospital and our universities, and we've also got the voice of individual climate advocates. And we have a strong population of folks fighting tirelessly for, energy and equity considerations. But those groups, the institutions, the climate advocates had very, very different opinions and needs. So balancing those was a challenge, but through the outreach process I already referred to, and through sort of stating the project goals very early and being transparent about the process, we were able to balance those, and ultimately each kind of set of comments helped make it much stronger, the code, and enabled more broad support for it. We dealt with a lot of knee-jerk reactions. I'm sure a lot of you do in your own work about, for example, low window to wall ratio. People were saying, the building's going to be dark. You need windows to be healthy. We totally agree. It's really just about being mindful where you place the windows. So you don't need them as much in stairwells. You do need them in your places where you're spending a lot of time. Obviously, the people assume that green buildings are going to cost more. And so that's why from day one, we focused on affordability and came up with a whole section of the code in the easy path that focuses on affordability. A lot of people are saying, hey, it's not time to electrify yet. Don't focus so much on heat pumps and EVs until the grid's cleaner. Well, upstate New York, according to the EPA, has the cleanest grid in the nation. We're very lucky in that respect to have a lot of hydro coming from Canada, and from a greenhouse gas emissions perspective, lucky to have a lot of nuclear. Obviously, other problems with that. So it really is time today, yesterday, to electrify in our region. And implementation itself has provided some challenges too, both educating our own town staff as well as applicants. And also it just takes a little more time and resources to get the application process through. Cornelia, please skip 2 slides ahead. I think I'm going to mostly skip these technical challenges. There were several, but in the interest of time, just want to have this slide, which will be distributed, I believe. It's got links to the various code supplement and various supporting documents. Feel free to check those out after the meeting. And on the final slide, it's just my contact information. I'm happy to address any questions that don't get answered today in the future. So thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Nick. It's very interesting hearing the kind of progress that a small community can make. Next, I'm going to introduce Casey Studhalter to give us a view of a large community, which is Washington, D.C. Casey is a green building program analyst with DC's Department of Energy and Environment. He has served in this role since 2018, where he coordinates interagency green building efforts across the district. Casey also serves as the agency's representative in the construction codes development process and chairs the Green Construction and Commercial Energy Conservation Codes Technical Advisory Group.
And
Hello,
Cornelia,
Casey.
I'm so sorry, but it looks like I have my wires crossed and shared the wrong slides.
Oh, should I, why don't I let you share? Do you want to do that?
If that's possible, that'd be
Okay.
great. Thank you so
Yes,
much.
you should be able to, let me stop my share. And you should be able to share now.
That is so embarrassing. Thank you, everyone, for your
All right.
patience. Okay, so just confirming that you are able to see the slide here, Appendix Z.
Yes.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, that's a terrible start. My name is Casey Studhalter with DC's Department of Energy and Environment, as Cornelia said, and thanks everyone for your time and engagement today. And I would like to talk a little bit about the District of Columbia's existing stretch code, which we have labeled Appendix Z, as it is focused on net zero energy. And I can talk a little bit about how and why we developed our own homegrown stretch code here. And I can talk briefly about the why, and then I can talk about in specifics at the end about what that Appendix Z entails. And I think, everyone's coming from a different perspective. All of our jurisdictions are different. So, just acknowledging, that the District of Columbia is a unique jurisdiction. We do not have that state level authority to engage with. We are a district, so handle both the state and local government functions, and the district has the home rule authority to adopt strengthening amendments to the model codes and essentially set our own local codes as needed. So recognizing not all jurisdictions have that authority. So with that, I can talk again, sort of leading up to sort of how we got to where we are and why, and much of that is coming from our climate plans and the analysis that's gone into them, which I think has really built a coalition of support for the stretch codes and the above code strengthening amendments as well. There's a network, sort of an ecosystem of plans, as everyone has. Sustainable DC has been around for a better part of a decade now, set some very high level climate goals, cutting energy use by 50%, growing the use of renewables to 50%, and cutting our greenhouse gas emissions, again, by 50%. And our Clean Energy DC plan, which was launched in 2018, starts to really refine those and put some very specific implementable actions behind them to help see that those high-level goals to fruition. And as a part of the analysis that went into that Clean Energy DC plan development, this pie chart really resonates with me and drives a lot of my work. And there will be no math here today, but if you add up the 3 shades of green in the pie chart here, you'll see that right around 74% or 3/4 of the greenhouse gas emissions in the district come from building operations. And what this does not include is embodied carbon, but we're talking purely operational GHG emissions. And for us, this means buildings are a key focus for any climate plan. And I know many of your jurisdictions, everyone's pie chart looks differently. The districts, what we do not have is a heavy industry sector that many other locations will, which would change the allocation there of the pie chart. So I don't think it's that our buildings are any worse, but rather what's not included here, just given the nature of our city, and there's a decent transportation mode split. But so it's, again, focusing on buildings is a really key piece for us. We've called out a few policies in our Clean Energy DC plan, including net zero energy new buildings, which are anticipated to get us 10% of the necessary savings. That wedge chart on the left is showing how all of the proposed policies will get us down to that 50% reduction. And so our stretch code, this Appendix Z, is our vision for how we can enact that net zero new buildings piece. And I also like this slide because it's when we put together a slate of proposed policies in this plan, it became clear that there's no opportunity to pick and choose which is more politically palatable or technologically easier. It really is a case that it all needs to be on the table in achieving this 50% carbon reduction goal. And so, we can't pick and choose. And so we're advancing on a number of fronts simultaneously, which includes this goal for net zero energy. And so we are, over the last few code cycles, have been ramping down, trying to increase energy efficiency requirements in both the commercial and residential sections as much as possible. And this slide here showing a piece of legislation is now out of date, thankfully. There was a bill requiring net zero energy by 2026, essentially taking what we had as a goal and codifying it into law. That has since been signed by the mayor. So the goal of net zero by 2026 has been cemented in law, and certainly we are continuing to work towards that. And all of this is to say that net zero energy is a strong goal for the district, and we've seen the creation of a stretch code as a way to telegraph to the market where we envision going with our code. That is the function of a stretch code in many ways. Provide a way to gather real-time feedback from project teams in what may be that future language, and help define some of these terms. It's a silly statement here on the slide, but everyone knows that net zero energy is simple in theory. Energy in, energy out. Balance what's consumed with what's generated, and that's it. But we found a number of questions, details that we think need to be answered for the district, and so our Appendix Z, which was adopted in 2017, is an attempt to put some of these into a working definition so that we can get feedback from project teams and revise that working definition over time as we move towards a goal, well, no longer a goal, a 2026 requirement. And so some of the questions here, I'm sure any of you would would agree, on-site versus off-site energy. How do we consider those, particularly in an urban jurisdiction, over a certain height? And I think that's probably right around 3 stories. Net zero energy isn't very possible entirely on-site. So we need to figure out how are we allowing off-site renewables to satisfy that balance. Do we care where they're generated? Do we care how they're generated? Do we allow on-site combustion? At the moment, we are leaning towards no, with a few limited exceptions for on-site combustion. And is it modeled or performance-based for net zero? Recognizing that the performance basis, demonstrated net zero is perhaps the ideal outcome, but from a code enforcement standpoint, a lot of the enforcement mechanism ends at the issuance of a certificate of occupancy. And so it's the process and the mechanisms in place and available to us now really focus on the modeled. So trying to tease out exactly how modeled net zero projects are performing in the real world, and identifying if there is a delta, and what contributes to that is certainly an ongoing effort, and will be an interesting one to follow. And certainly no surprise to this audience, but again, the need for a homegrown stretch code for us was felt that the national model codes were just simply not progressing quickly enough. And so this is a helpful image by the New Buildings Institute, sort of showing, conceptually, I think, how codes need to progress in order to achieve a net zero energy goal, shrinking those regulated loads to the maximum amount possible, in the process, hopefully influencing those unregulated loads, and growing the amount of renewables. This shows photovoltaics, but renewable energy to help balance that. So that's the conceptual goal. And then the tracking the national model codes, it was clear that relying on the model codes, even with strengthening local amendments, is unlikely to give us the performance that we need to really satisfy that goal in time. And so recognizing that trajectory, the dotted line there, is unlikely to happen in the code development. Again, we felt the need to go out and create our own Appendix Z to the Energy Conservation Code. So these are my last 2 slides that talk in more detail about what's in our stretch code. We haven't traditionally called it a stretch code, but I think really that's functionally how it operates. It is a voluntary alternative compliance pathway to our commercial energy code, and is, as I mentioned, intended to provide that working definition for net zero energy. And this was drafted, with support from private sector partners like the New Buildings Institute and with our code development volunteers and apparatus, but was largely done here in-house, which was a long, a long development process, and I wasn't even a party to the beginning of it. But it's a serious undertaking, and I think what we're seeing now is there's a proliferation of other examples, and I think it is frustrating, and it's interesting to see many jurisdictions like ourselves sort of toiling away independently, but working towards the same goal. So to the extent that we can coordinate, forums like this, organizations like the RIOs are incredibly helpful for that. Our approach for net zero, as is embodied in this stretch code, really starts with energy efficiency first. We do not want buildings trying to slap a large amount of renewable energy on an inefficient building and calling it net zero. And again, that I think really helps demonstrate the need for some specific technical, like guardrails on a net zero energy policy, to ensure that we're not just buying a bunch of offsite solar or renewable energy credits or whatever it may be to offset an otherwise leaky, inefficient building. So our Appendix Z does a pretty tries in many ways to put some pretty tight minimums on efficiency, or before we even talk about renewables. And so this is the sort of the meat of the of Appendix Z for us. We put some maximum heating and cooling demands taken from the Passive House standard. We utilized a zero energy performance index of 30 or lower. To be honest, we're moving away from the use of that ZEPI score for our next update. I think it was found to be not as commonly utilized as we had hoped at the time when this was drafted back in 2016 and 2017. So identifying what that index may be as we move forward, we're trying to better align with the ASHRAE performance modeling in Appendix G, and utilizing more commonly understood modeling parameters and terms to make it as simple as possible. So I think Appendix Z was our first go, and we're finding we need to maybe find a better partnership between our stretch code with Appendix Z and the base code. And then we carried forward commissioning and air tightness requirements. And for renewable energy, prohibited on-site combustion with an exception for commercial kitchens, and then set a minimum on-site generation requirement before projects could look to off-site. Again, wanting to minimize transmission losses and really focus on doing as much on-site while recognizing that's unlikely to be feasible for all buildings. And we did originally require demonstrated performance. However, the enforcement mechanism is not there. So we really are focusing on modeled performance with the expectation that we would like to see data going forward. And there is a transition from the energy code to energy benchmarking. And eventually we do have a BEPS in place. So then BEPS reporting as well once that becomes an occupied existing building. So all of these, this soup of policies that we're all talking about have some very key connection points. And my contact information, so I'm happy to answer questions.
Great, thank you so much, Casey. So I think if we could invite back all of our panelists, we'll have a Q&A session. And joining us, we have Darren Port, Senior Manager, Codes and Standards at NEAT.
Great. Thanks, Cornelia, and welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So we do have a number of questions. I'll start with one for Nick. The question is, can you explain why you don't require a green rating system certification? And how are you verifying compliance with the stretch code?
Sure, I can try to address that. We didn't want to require certification because we know that there's sometimes costs, even high costs involved, and didn't want to force that. What we're looking for is the building design, not any particular stamp of approval. But it is important how we verify that the building is designed like that. So that there's different methods depending on the different certification. So one of the options is this greenhouse gas calculation method, which is basically figured out through energy modeling. So in that case, we have an energy professional who certifies the job with their stamp. For example, passive house, obviously for anything you can get certified, and that alone would be fine. But if you don't want to, you can get a pre-certification letter for passive house design, which would be acceptable for that. Another method is using basically a HERS score. They gave another name in New York State, the Energy Rating Index. But if you use the method prescribed in the New York State code for using the HERS rating, that will satisfy us too as a method of compliance. So it sort of depends on the specific system being used, but we do have a verification in place.
Great, thanks. I guess the same question could apply for Casey or Alison about verification or certification of compliance with the stretch code. Anything else to add to that question?
I'll let Casey answer, since we're so, just starting this process. I don't think we know yet how that's going to happen, but I'm sure Casey has a lot to add to that.
I have less than I would like to add. I think what I didn't mention is that we have had 0 projects certify under the Appendix C alternative compliance pathway. And, I had that seen large uptake. I think that our plan reviewers and our Department of Buildings would have certainly seen a heavy lift in reviewing and enforcing that. So that would certainly be challenging. When we do, in addition to Appendix Z, we do have some alternative compliance pathways, and in those we do require that projects pursuing green building certifications do achieve that. It's not a design to standard, it truly is certification required, and I understand the reasons not to, but we do feel that there's value in that enforcement mechanism, particularly in those cases that have additional on-site verification, like some of the LEED residential programs. We really, I think it adds great weight, that additional third-party verification. So we've chosen wherever possible to include that.
Great, thanks, Casey. So another question for you, Casey, is DC considering how the stretch code could potentially set up buildings for inclusion into the BPS? So can you talk about that nexus between the stretch code or base codes for that matter and building performance standards?
Yeah, I feel like there's enough material there for an entirely separate conversation.
That's a whole other presentation.
Many challenges in that the codes and our BEPS are developed very separate from each other, and so there isn't a lot of direct interplay and connection. However, the general sense that a stretch code will develop a very high performing building that is unlikely to not satisfy the BEPS. A highly efficient new construction building, once that becomes an existing building and is operational, it's very unlikely to fall below that BEPS threshold and have to comply. It frankly would, if as net zero energy becomes the mandate at the end of 2026, that volume of net zero new construction is likely to raise the local median Energy Star score, which is currently our BEPS threshold. So it will certainly raise our average performance and add a bunch of high performing buildings to the district.
Great, thanks. Question actually for Ian. The question is concerning DOE's requirements for energy codes, and the question is, what actions can be taken to get all states to adopt energy codes per DOE's requirements?
That is a really good question, and likely
Yes.
not one that I can answer, unfortunately. But
Yeah.
I mean, I think and I won't speak on behalf of DOE, but they're heavily focused on implementation and providing the resources to support more advanced energy code adoption, and I think that certainly has been a request by a lot of states. Is it's hard to adopt the new codes without the technical training and resources to support those. So I think with the the Inflation Reduction Act and with the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the funding coming out of there, there's certainly going to be opportunities to do that. But yeah, sorry, can't answer that question more directly.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, certainly I would recommend all folks seek technical assistance from their RIO, and they can certainly provide on the ground assistance as far as workforce development or training and other technical assistance towards code adoption, implementation, enforcement. So a question for Alison. Are there best practices learned that you can recommend to other min-max states or jurisdictions within those states interested in adopting a stretch code?
Sure, that's a great question.
Yes.
So first of all, Ian just brought up the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and both of those will be, as he mentioned, having some funding available to states that are interested in advancing their codes, specifically the Inflation Reduction Act, I believe, and don't quote me 100%, but it's like $1 billion to states that like a third of that will go to states that update to the 2021 or better. And then the other 2/3 of that 1 billion is for net zero. So in that case, I would say if you are a state or if you are a city within a state that is interested in doing stretch codes and you don't have that option, a lot of times the pushback comes from the building industry or the policymakers themselves, because they are afraid for the cost. And I think that this is trying to bridge that gap. And so I think if you can put together a proposal with the state to try to get some money to push that forward, that might actually be something that is available now. And even if you can't get a stretch code, maybe at least you can get your state code to be updated to the 2021 or better. And then for min-max states, though, Massachusetts was such a shining star, an example for stretch codes. It was one of the first in the US, as I'm sure many of you know. And they did it through an appendix chapter. And I do think that a lot of min-max states actually have that option, but don't really understand how to use it. So maybe, I can speak to that more, but I know that there are a lot of people here that work in Massachusetts, and so maybe I'll let them speak to that and how that works. But it is a really great option and still allows a base code for states. So Darren or someone that works in Massachusetts, feel free to chime in if you like.
Sure. Yeah, so the original stretch code in Massachusetts was an appendix to the code. The stretch code, however, it's part of a larger program called Green Communities. And within the Green Communities, there's a number of different requirements that communities have to adhere to, the stretch code just being one of them. The others is an audit of their building, transitioning the fleet to electric vehicles, and then they receive certain incentives to do so. So there was a sort of carrot and stick there through the green communities that drove nearly, the majority of the state to participate in the program. But we're seeing, stretch codes implemented in many different ways throughout, the whole NEEP region, either through appendices or standalone programs. But the biggest question, and I'll throw this out to all three of our presenters, is affordability. And so does stretch codes increase costs, and is it cost effective to have stretch codes? Anyone want to grab that?
Yeah, I'll just tackle that from our point of view really quickly. So the one thing I would say, this is another kind of tool in your toolbox for stretch codes, is potentially working with the local utilities. In Massachusetts, their utilities actually do work on the stretch codes and provide some support there. So that can be really helpful. And as I mentioned, we're trying to do that in Illinois, but there's a number of places, including California, which with utilities basically all got together and said, we'll help support the stretch codes and the strong code here, but then also supporting communities in California to go beyond stretch codes. And I know that this is all, that's California, and that's, no scenario is completely exactly like every state that we're in. So I would say that. And then I guess I'm forgetting what the other part of your question was, Darren.
So I think, just generally affordability, first cost, is it a deterrent for adopting a stretch code?
Yes. And I think, I think that I think that there can be some increased costs for certain things. I think that there are ways to get at that. And again, working with your local utilities can help with that. I also think that there are some great examples by, for example, Habitat for Humanity, who are building homes that are net zero, or sometimes even better. And they're doing it because it's more affordable for people that live inside those buildings. And so, I'm speaking strictly on the single family residential side. But you shouldn't be building like a 6,000 square foot home and expecting that. These are also small homes that will have a smaller energy footprint and will not need as much solar to offset. Anyway, so that's what I would say for affordability. I think there's many different ways to tackle it. I think there's a lot of resources out there, and it sounds like the federal government is interested in helping that pursue that as well. But I'll hand it off to my other panelists.
Anybody else want to take that? I guess the other question that arises is, if the state adopts a statewide stretch code that then municipalities can choose to opt in or opt out, can that stretch code, for lack of better terms, be weaponized against affordable housing? So if the stretch code, if it costs more to build to a stretch code, a municipality chooses to use it, therefore excludes affordable housing from being built in that municipality. Has anyone heard that argument or have any response to that?
I mean, I'll just point out, and you again probably should know more about this, but Massachusetts, one of the ways that they got communities to actually adopt the stretch code was that it had to, if your municipality wanted to receive funding for affordable housing, then you had to be a stretch code municipality. So basically you had to already require that if you were going to build affordable housing, that it was going to be built to the stretch code. And so I don't think it has to be a disincentive. It can actually be an incentive.
Absolutely. Great.
I can add just a little bit more about the affordability question. I already spoke in my presentation about the affordability improvements that we used, and affordability was a key concern from the very beginning of the project. So there's things like in the heating systems and the heated space, or the efficient building shape point I talked about, or a modest window to wall ratio. There's tools we have that are just underused in codes, and they save construction costs. They reduce energy use and cost. And so it's like there's some practices that could be used more. In addition, for compliance with this code, basically from the minute you walk into town hall with a project, you're going to be reminded, hey, you have to comply with the energy code supplement. So the goal is for people to start, this is no surprise probably for anyone on the call, but the goal is for people to, from the very project conception, to have the energy goals and the greenhouse gas goals in mind already, as opposed to an add-on after the project's already designed. And then, yeah, sure, it's a big cost adder. But if you think about it from step one, you can sometimes even decrease costs. We didn't do a heavy cost analysis. It just didn't have the resources to do a really deep cost analysis of our policy. But from the light analysis we had, we were satisfied that the price increases, if any, even later stages of the code, would be low enough that we were comfortable with.
Great. Yeah, there's many reports that address the affordability question, including one from here, an organization in Boston, the GBC Boston chapter, that puts actually zero energy codes at really just a 1% increase to break into that zero energy realm. So really not outrageous costs involved to getting even all the ways to net zero. So that's the main questions, the general questions. There's one that's a little bit more down the weeds, but I think it's pretty interesting in the last few minutes we have. It says energy modeling more often than not misrepresents actual energy use. Any thoughts on how to require utility verification to meet net zero and tie that to a certificate of occupancy? So maybe Casey, maybe you've thought about this a little bit.
I share concerns more than I have answers, but I think again, it maybe speaks to the importance of a broad swath and not putting all of our sort of eggs in one basket and focusing on energy codes. The district does also have a building energy performance standard that will catch poor performing existing buildings, and so. I think that there is a relationship there between having a strict energy code and doing everything we can with the energy modeling guidance and parameters, but also recognizing, and I would argue that the problem is even bigger than simply the energy modeling not matching the actual performance. Commissioning, I think, is incredibly important to ensure that what is spec'd and goes into that model is actually what's installed and that it's installed correctly. And airtightness, again, as a part of that commissioning is really important to ensure that the building is operating as intended. And then the human factor, now people show up and, as history has shown, humans were the wild card. And so operational behavior, if a data center or a data heavy tenant moves into the fourth floor, that wasn't anticipated, that building can start to perform differently than anticipated. So there's a lot that we can do, but I think there's also needs to be a recognition that that operation is always going to differ from the model, and hopefully we have other ways to engage with that.
I can add on a little to that. I mean, I would, in our analysis, we don't think it's possible to tie it to the certificate of occupancy. We got pretty strong guidance from our stakeholder group that our point of control stops when the building opens. And there's no way that after they've been in there for a year and we check the data, we can go back and say, hey, this is not good enough. We can't do that with a new building code. That will require existing building standards, which we're very interested in. Kudos to Casey and his team for having a BPS. We would love to have that. We're hoping it will happen at the state level on an ambitious timescale, but we will see. But yeah, we didn't see any way to tie performance to the certificate of occupancy.
Great. Well, thank you. I think that concludes our time. Is that correct, Cornelia?
Yes, I think
Yeah.
we're at time.
All
Thank
right.
you so much to all of our panelists, and thank you, Darren.
Sure.
just a reminder to everyone, this is being recorded, and please do come back for the rest of the seminar series. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all. Take
Thanks,
care.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.